Inside the giant hall, where the vines entwined everything, all eyes were focused on the source of the light. The expressions varied as two figures tore through the vines and broke free from their restraints, appearing before everyone's gaze. As the light faded, Mu Chen and Luo Li's figures became clear. Clap, clap. Seeing the two break free, Xinqing's eyes narrowed slightly, but he smiled and clapped his hands, saying, "I didn't expect even the boundless wood realm couldn't trap you too. Truly impressive." The vines here were quite extraordinary. Even experts facing the physical body tribulation would be unable to escape once bound. Moreover, their spiritual energy would gradually be devoured by the vines. The harder they struggled, the faster their spiritual energy would dissipate, until it was entirely consumed. At that point, they would lose all resistance and become helpless prey. Mu Chen and Luo Li's escape obviously surprised Xinqing. It seemed they had some special means, but that was likely all. The situation was now fully under his control. With the two teams stationed here, even if Mu Chen and Luo Li broke free, what could they do? Mu Chen's gaze turned cold as he stared at Xinqing, dark arcs of lightning flickering around his fingertips. "It seems you still haven't given up," Xinqing said, a faint smile on his lips. Xia Hou also smiled faintly, his eyes mocking as he looked at the two, then pointed toward the giant hall. "But in the current situation, what can you two do? Mu Chen, how about I give you a chance? Leave now, alone, and we'll let you go. How about it?" His smile was cruel. If Mu Chen abandoned his companions and fled alone, he would likely be despised by everyone at the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy in the future. Such a fate would be worse than death. It was similar to what had happened to Qiu Beihai, who had fled earlier. Mu Chen glanced at Xia Hou, smiled, and shook his head. "That won't work on me, Xia Hou. I'm afraid you're not qualified for that." Xia Hou chuckled lightly, but there was no warmth in his smile. He tilted his head, looking at Xinqing, rubbing his forehead. "What a troublesome guy. Looks like I need to let him experience just how powerful the spiritual energy tribulation can be." "No objections," Xinqing said, a playful smile on his face. He had completely taken control of the situation. Now, all he needed to do was absorb enough spiritual energy to awaken the Divine Wood Guard. He didn't mind watching this show. As for Mu Chen, Xinqing didn't care too much. Although Mu Chen was capable of incredible combat power for someone at the late heaven-reaching stage, so what? In the end, he was just a late-stage heaven-reaching expert. No matter what means he had, it would be difficult for him to defeat an expert in the spiritual energy tribulation. "This little beauty, when they start fighting, I'll keep an eye on you. So, I hope you don't cause any trouble. Although you're the most enchanting girl I've seen in years, I won't show too much mercy for the greater good," Xinqing said to Luo Li with a grin. Luo Li shot him a cold glance, then turned to Mu Chen, who gave her a light smile and a nod. Seeing this, Luo Li stepped back 2 paces, then sat down cross-legged. Her jade hand grasped the Luo god's sword, which she planted into the ground before her. Instantly, a sword hum rang out, and a surge of sword light spread outward. This sword light was so sharp it was indescribable. It even cut fine cracks into the surrounding space, and the vines around them were severed in layers. Within a radius of about 10 feet around her, the vines that had been spreading everywhere were completely eradicated by the sword light. Under this sword light, even the special boundless wood realm of the giant hall couldn't penetrate. "Since you want to play, we'll play along. But, just to remind you, this is their battle. Anyone who dares to interfere might find my sword fully unsheathed. I don't know what the outcome will be, but Xinqing, you might just die by my sword," Luo Li said, her translucent, glass-like eyes sweeping over Xinqing and the others. Her voice was calm but carried a chilling undertone. Xinqing and the others stared at the Luo god sword in front of Luo Li, their expressions changing dramatically. They sensed an extremely dangerous fluctuation emanating from it. "Is that a divine artifact?" Xinqing and Xia Hou exchanged a glance, their pupils contracting slightly. They hadn't expected this beautiful young woman to possess a true divine artifact. Though she seemed to have the strength of just someone in the physical body tribulation, with that sword, even someone in the spiritual energy tribulation would have to be cautious. In this vast world, anything even remotely related to a divine artifact carries immense power and intimidation. While the Wood Spirit clan does possess divine artifacts, such items could never fall into Xun'er's hands. So when he saw Luoli holding a divine artifact, his heart couldn't help but shake slightly. It seems you really have a lot of confidence in Mu Chen. Xun'er's gaze flickered, suppressing the shock in his heart, and he looked at Luoli deeply as he spoke. Luoli sat at the center, wielding the divine sword to exert dominance, clearly intending to clear any obstacles for Mu Chen. This obviously showed her great confidence in him. She believed Mu Chen could defeat Xia Hou, but did she truly think Xia Hou was an easy opponent? One of the 4 saints of Sacred Spirit Academy, Xia Hou had mastered the spiritual energy tribulation and was among the top contenders in the entire Spiritual Academy Grand Competition. If it was a one-on-one battle, even Xun'er wouldn't be sure he could defeat Xia Hou without using special means. And Mu Chen, who was merely at the late heaven-reaching stage, could he really pull it off? Luoli merely glanced at him without acknowledging him, her jade hand resting on the Luo god sword. With a delicate movement of her slender fingers, the sword let out a crisp sound. Seeing this, Xun'er smiled faintly, saying nothing further, but a murderous intent surged in his heart. The situation, which he had previously controlled, had unexpectedly shifted. However, it didn't matter. As long as Xia Hou dealt with Mu Chen, once they teamed up, even if Luoli had a divine artifact, it wouldn't be enough to turn the tide. Xun'er shifted his gaze to Xia Hou, who was wearing a grim smile at the corner of his lips. It seemed she had great faith in Mu Chen. But would she still hold on to that trust when he had Mu Chen under his foot? Inside the giant hall, Tang Meyer, Zhou Yuan, and several other teams were bound by vines. They struggled with all their might, but it was of no use, and they could only give up. Their eyes, peering through the vines, were filled with concern. The current situation could only be reversed by Mu Chen and Luoli, but they were just 2 people. At this moment, Mu Chen was clearly about to engage in a true battle with Xia Hou. While they knew Mu Chen's combat abilities couldn't be judged by ordinary standards, Xia Hou had truly mastered the spiritual energy tribulation. Facing him, even Tang Meyer and Zhou Yuan had no chance of victory. Could Mu Chen manage to do it? Moreover, if Mu Chen were to lose to Xia Hou, the intimidation Luoli had so carefully built would crumble. Even if she held the divine sword, it would be hard for her to take on 2 powerful teams alone. Now, everything rested on Mu Chen. Under the gathered gazes in the giant hall, Mu Chen slowly exhaled a puff of white air. He looked at Xia Hou, whose lips curled into a sinister smile, and with a slight grin, said, "I guess I need to take you down to avoid disappointing her." Xia Hou chuckled, a chilling smile on his face. His long, pale hands suddenly began to shine with a sparkling light, giving off a dazzling brilliance, though it was cold as death beneath the surface. It seems the brief encounter outside the dark forest gave you some false confidence. Xia Hou slowly clenched his palms, his gaze growing colder. He suddenly stepped forward, and immediately, a vast and mighty spiritual energy surged like a tidal wave, sweeping through the entire hall with overwhelming pressure. At that moment, he released the full extent of his spiritual energy tribulation. He no longer wished to see Mu Chen stand before him with a calm facade. He intended to use the power of the spiritual energy tribulation to crush him beneath his feet, to make him understand despair. Under the overwhelming power of the spiritual energy tribulation, he was as helpless as a rabbit trapped by a lion, with no chance of resistance. "Now, I will destroy that so-called confidence of yours." Xia Hou's smile was filled with malice. The immense spiritual pressure howled, rushing forward like a wave. The oppressive force hit Mu Chen, causing his clothes to flutter. He took a deep breath, his palms clenching tightly. Black lightning crackled around his body, his skin darkening slightly. For thunder runes slowly appeared on his chest. Boom! The black lightning sizzled around Mu Chen's body as his thunder god body was fully activated. Spiritual energy surged like a torrential flood through his veins, his body entering the strongest combat state. "You want to play?" Mu Chen's black eyes gleamed with a sharp cold light, gathering like a blade's edge. He gave a sinister smile, and suddenly, his foot slammed down. Boom! Thunder roared as if it exploded beneath his feet, black arcs of lightning flickering. In an instant, his figure shot forward like a bolt. Bang! Xia Hou sneered, also leaping forward in the same moment. His vast spiritual energy surged like an ocean, as though the very air was being crushed and blown away. The tense atmosphere inside the giant hall shattered in that instant. All eyes focused on them. Boom! The immense spiritual energy roared through the giant hall like a tidal wave, and then two figures streaked across the sky like meteors. In the next moment, they collided heavily, under the watchful eyes of the anxious onlookers. The impact was pure power, no frills, just raw strength clashing head-on. One side relied on brute force, while the other carried a vast momentum of spiritual energy. Both forces were powerful enough to make the earth tremble and mountains collapse. Boom! The moment they collided, a violent windstorm erupted, cracking the floor of the hall. The writhing vines were also shattered layer by layer from the shockwave. Swish! The two figures were hurled backward by the impact. The special material of the hall's floor cracked into powder beneath their feet, leaving deep footprints behind. Chen's body shook, lightning flashing as he resisted the overwhelming spiritual energy invading his body. A serious expression appeared on his handsome face. While Xia Hou's strength couldn't match his Thunder God body, which had reached the 4-rune Thunder body, the sheer magnitude of Xia Hou's spiritual energy was even greater. Spiritual energy tribulation was a transformation of spiritual energy. Before undergoing the tribulation, the spiritual energy one could contain was like a lake. After, it became like the sea. The difference was enormous. If Chen hadn't cultivated the complete version of the Great Pagoda art, which also transformed his internal energy, he would likely have been completely suppressed by the vast spiritual energy of his opponent. Heh, tough body. Looks like you've cultivated some powerful body forging technique, and your mastery is no small feat. No wonder you have the confidence to challenge the spiritual energy tribulation at the late heaven-reaching stage. Xia Hou sneered, his slender palm shimmering with a faint jade glow as he glared at Chen. However, while Xia Hou sneered, he was also surprised. Chen's physical body was incredibly strong, even surpassing his own after overcoming the physical body tribulation. He couldn't understand how Chen had achieved such strength. Chen glanced at him indifferently, not engaging in a war of words. With a stomp of his foot, the earth cracked open, and a dragon-shaped figure seemed to form beneath him. In a flash of light, he vanished from his original position. So fast. Xia Hou's pupils contracted. He immediately clenched his fist and swung a powerful punch toward the void on his right. Boom! Vast spiritual energy surged, and a jade-like glow flickered around Xia Hou's fist, packing immense power. However, Xia Hou's seemingly guaranteed punch had no effect. It passed through empty space and landed with nothing but air. Chen's figure hadn't appeared as expected. After missing, Xia Hou's expression shifted. He then sensed a terrifying wave of power rapidly approaching from behind. Chen's speed was so fast that Xia Hou couldn't even track it properly. But despite the miscalculation, Xia Hou was no ordinary fighter. With a tap of his toes, his body soared half a meter into the air. His legs whizzed like whips, carrying rolling spiritual energy and leaving a series of afterimages. He quickly struck backward like lightning, aiming to intercept the punch wind. Boom! Boom! The leg shadows tore through the air, even ripping the atmosphere apart. Boom! The blows from fists and legs collided with a deafening crash, and a terrifying storm of power materialized around them. The ground beneath them was torn open with huge cracks. At this moment, both of them pushed their powers to the limit. The destructive force in their clash was incredible. Boom! Inside the giant hall, the two figures crossed each other, and the fearsome shockwaves caused the space around them to distort. Chen steadied his body in mid-air, rapidly changing his hand seals. The immense spiritual energy behind him transformed into a starry sky, with 4 massive beast silhouettes forming and shooting out as beams of starry light. 4 gods sealing heaven seal. A colossal light seal descended from the sky, enveloping Xia Hou entirely. Humph! Looking at the massive light seal, Xia Hou's eyes turned cold. With a sneer, he curved his 2 fingers, the tips shimmering with starry light. In the next moment, he thrust his fingers into the air, unleashing a powerful burst of starlight. A giant beam of starlight shot out from his fingers, roaring like a torrent and stretching across the void. Star-shattering divine finger. With Xia Hou's low growl, the starlight beam shot through the air, colliding fiercely with the descending light seal. Boom! The instant they collided, a thunderous roar erupted, and the 2 immense forces clashed before rippling outward. Chen faced the terrifying shockwave, his body crackling with lightning. He activated the Thunder God body to its maximum, his skin surging with lightning as his muscles expanded, releasing powerful energy. Then, he tightly gripped his palms and let the shockwave hit, causing the lightning to explode from his body. His form trembled, and he was forced to retreat over 100 steps. On the opposite side, Xia Hou swung his palms, forming a vast, spiritual energy barrier in front of him. But the hastily erected barrier couldn't fully withstand the overwhelming shock, quickly shattering, sending his body stumbling backward. Both had given their all, yet neither gained a decisive upper hand. Inside the Great Hall, Tang Meyer, Zhou Yuan, and the others watched the clash without blinking, their hearts churning with unease. This was the first time they had seen Chen fully unleash his power, and his incredible combat prowess left them stunned. Xia Hou had already surpassed the spiritual energy tribulation, yet here was Chen, only in the late heaven-reaching stage, stopping him. This guy is quite capable. Jinqing's eyes darkened as he observed the 2 combatants. The situation was clearly not as he had expected. He had thought that while Chen could hold his ground against Xia Hou for a time, he would eventually be overpowered. But seeing the current situation, things were clearly different from his predictions. Captain, that kid is incredibly strong. No one here can match him. It's precisely because of this strength that he can stand toe-to-toe with Xia Hou. A voice murmured from behind Jinqing. Captain, should we do something? What if Xia Hou loses? Someone else whispered, their tone cold with malice. Jinqing's eyes flickered as he glanced at Luoli nearby. She was holding the divine sword that had always intimidated him. A sharp, unparalleled sword intent radiated from her, subtly carving fine lines through the air around her. That sword was extraordinarily formidable. No rush, Jinqing said with a slight shake of his head, a sinister smile curling at the corners of his lips. That kid may be physically tough, but relying solely on that won't let him win against Xia Hou. He paused, then added, besides, we only need a little more time. When the moment comes, I'll show them what true despair is. In midair, Chen looked up at Xia Hou. The latter's face was dark, likely unsettled by the display of power Chen had shown. Looks like spiritual energy tribulation isn't as invincible as you thought. Chen smiled lightly, his eyes lowering slightly as he clenched his palm. The dragon-devouring demonic spear appeared in a flash, releasing a vast aura of bloodlust that chilled the air in the hall. With a flick of his finger, the spear shot forward, its murderous energy coalescing into a gigantic demonic dragon that loomed in the sky, exuding a terrifying aura. The dragon-devouring demonic spear was a supreme-grade spiritual artifact. When it was in Mo Xingtian's hands, it had temporarily stalled the ceiling of the great Sumeru demon pillar, which spoke volumes about its power. Go! Xia Hou's gaze was cold as he stared at the rushing demon dragon. Suddenly, a dazzling light erupted from his hand, which resembled white jade. Upon closer inspection, it seemed as though a thin, star-like veil was peeling off from his palm, transforming into 2 glowing orbs of light, each like a shining star. Waves of starlight spread out, cold and sharp. Chen watched this scene, his eyes narrowing slightly as he murmured, so that's why your hands are so powerful. It's because of this thing. The star-like veil was clearly some kind of unique spiritual artifact, and judging by the energy fluctuations, it must be of considerable grade. No wonder, when Chen had clashed with him earlier, he had felt a faint pain in his palm. Boom! The 2 star-like orbs shot out, colliding with the demon dragon. An immense surge of spiritual energy erupted between them. Xia Hou stood on the void, undisturbed by the terrifying fluctuations coming from above. His eyes, filled with icy coldness, locked onto Mu Chen. Slowly, he clenched his palms, his hoarse voice filled with a barely concealed killing intent. Next, I'll let you witness firsthand just how vast the gap is between you and a master who has crossed the spiritual energy tribulation. In the face of absolutely overwhelming spiritual energy, your fragile physical body has no means of resistance. Bloodshot veins spread in Xia Hou's eyes as he took a step forward. The space around him seemed to ripple with waves, and then his hands formed a strange seal. At the same time, a terrifying spiritual energy fluctuation exploded out, erupting like a volcano. As the terrifying spiritual energy unleashed, Xia Hou's icy voice echoed through the hall, every word punctuated with malice. Stars. Star art. When Xia Hou's cold voice resonated throughout the grand hall, everyone felt an indescribable torrent of spiritual energy surge from Xia Hou's body, like a volcano erupting. The spiritual waves created a hurricane that wildly swept through the hall. Xia Hou stood in the void, his hands weaving strange seals, his eyes filled with a chilling intent. Buzz. Behind him, overwhelming spiritual energy rapidly condensed. 3 massive vortices began to take shape, each shimmering with starlight. Spiritual energy poured into them relentlessly, and in just a few breaths, 3 massive stars, about 100 feet in diameter, were formed behind Xia Hou. The 3 stars gleamed with blinding light, and the immense spiritual energy radiated from them, with sharp, jagged edges that gave them an almost menacing appearance. These 3 stars were entirely formed from condensed spiritual energy. The violent fluctuations of spiritual energy emanating from them created a thunderous roar, the sound of spiritual energy clashing with the air. Inside the grand hall, Tang Meyer, Zhou Yuan, and the others were all shaken, their gazes fixed on the scene. The spiritual energy emanating from the stars made them feel a sense of impending doom. Clearly, Xia Hou had begun to reveal his true killing move, intending to end this battle here. Heh, no wonder you're the holy son of Sacred Spirit Academy, Xun'er remarked, his eyes narrowing slightly. A faint smile curled on his lips, but there was a hint of solemnity in his gaze. Even he, in a normal confrontation, would probably have to retreat in the face of Xia Hou's overwhelming assault. Xia Hou was truly formidable. No wonder he had become one of the 4 saints of Sacred Spirit Academy. Now that kid is in trouble. He'll soon realize just how terrifying a true master of the spiritual energy tribulation is. Xun'er chuckled indifferently, his gaze flicking briefly to Luo Li. The latter also raised her beautiful eyes, staring at Xia Hou in midair. Her brows were furrowed, a faint sense of worry in her expression as she regarded Xia Hou's sudden display of sharpness. Under the watchful eyes of many in the grand hall, Mu Chen also stared at this scene with a grim expression. Slowly, he clenched his palms, and black lightning flickered rapidly across his body. The 4 thunder runes on his chest grew increasingly bright as he pushed his thunder god body to its limits. He could clearly sense the danger approaching. At this point, even if you want to regret it, there's no chance left. Xia Hou's eyes locked onto Mu Chen, his smile twisted and sinister. He slowly raised his finger and pointed it at Mu Chen in midair, his gaze sharp like a blade. When Xia Hou's voice, filled with killing intent, emerged from his mouth, the 3 massive stars behind him instantly exploded with dazzling light. In the next moment, the stars shot out violently, connecting with each other like a rainbow, descending from the sky and enveloping Mu Chen's figure. Bang! Bang! The air in this region exploded violently, with shockwaves rolling outward. Mu Chen stared grimly at the 3 stars piercing toward him. He took a deep breath, his palm glowing with flickering black lightning. In an instant, he slapped out, "Thunder God's hand." A torrent of spiritual energy surged forth, and the black lightning accompanied the energy, crackling and transforming into a massive, thunderous hand. The hand was covered in thunder runes, and it struck fiercely at the 3 stars. Boom! The two forces collided violently, and the terrifying ripple of energy spread, causing the ground to crack open in large fissures. The destructive power was astonishing. Sizzle, sizzle. The two powers clashed, each aggressively eroding the other. Xia Hou looked at this scene, his lips curling into a cold smile. He then quickly changed his hand seals. Star explosion. Boom. One of the stars suddenly exploded, its overwhelming spiritual energy shockwave forcing the thunderous hand back. Even the runes on the hand dimmed slightly. Explosion. Another star exploded, causing cracks to form on the thunderous hand. You're finished, Xia Hou sneered, his face filled with a cruel smile. With a change of hand seals, the third star exploded. Boom. The wave of spiritual energy surged, and the thunder god's hand could no longer withstand the impact. The spiritual energy scattered, and the hand shattered apart. Yet, amidst the destruction, a remaining shard of rainbow light shot through and struck Chen, who had no time to dodge. Bang! His body was sent flying backward, crashing into a towering pillar. The impact was so forceful that even the special material of the pillar was left with deep dents. The moment Tang Meyer and the others, who had been closely watching the battle, saw this, their expressions changed drastically. Xia Hou looked at the dust and debris with a cold smirk, shaking his head. Now, have you learned what it means to overestimate yourself? From within the dust, a figure broke free from the massive pillar. Chen shook his head, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and with a frown, looked at Xia Hou, giving a faint smile. It certainly hurts, but why do you look like you've already won? Xia Hou's face turned icy as he stared at Chen, wiping the blood from his mouth. However, deep in his heart, he was slightly surprised. He had originally thought this move would be enough to finish off Chen, but it only left him wounded. This guy's physical body was stronger than he had anticipated. My star art is a top-tier divine technique. Do you really think it only has this much power? Xia Hou mocked with a sneer. Since you managed to survive this round of attacks, let me show you just how terrifying a top-tier divine technique can be. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone saw powerful spiritual energy rapidly gather behind him. This time, the spiritual energy vortex reached 9. Buzz. Buzz. 9 spiritual energy vortices spun wildly, forming a storm that ravaged the grand hall like a tornado. A terrifying spiritual pressure spread throughout the hall. The pressure was so intense that even Zhang Qing's face shifted slightly. His body tensed, and spiritual energy flowed over his skin. Even he had to use his own spiritual energy to resist this force. Xia Hou actually has such a powerful trump card, Zhang Qing thought solemnly. Thankfully, he had never gotten overconfident and confronted Xia Hou head-on. If he had, and Xia Hou had unleashed such a deadly attack, Zhang Qing wasn't sure he would have been able to survive without using some special means. The terrifying spiritual pressure rippled throughout the hall. Luo Li's eyes, as clear as glass, were fixed on Chen. Her jade-like hand, which gripped the Luo god sword, tightened slightly, clearly sensing the threat of Xia Hou's killing move. She shifted her gaze, focusing on the tall, slender figure of the young man. Despite the spiritual pressure causing his robes to ripple violently, Chen stood tall, unbowed beneath the pressure, like a spear piercing through the heavens. 9 massive spiritual energy vortices rapidly took shape, finally transforming into 9 stars that appeared behind Xia Hou. At this moment, his complexion had turned pale, clearly showing the tremendous strain of using such a technique. Even with his strength from having overcome the physical body tribulation, it still consumed an immense amount of energy. Despite his pale face, Xia Hou's eyes were filled with fervor and a sinister gleam. He grinned as he watched Chen struggle to hold on, as if he could already see the moment when Chen would be reduced to the state of a lost dog. This time, it's truly over. Xia Hou licked his lips with a bloodthirsty smile, then suddenly pointed his finger into the air. His voice, tinged with an uncontrollable murderous intent, rang out, "Star art, 9 stars piercing the sun." Boom. The entire grand hall seemed to tremble at that instant, as 9 stars shot out with a terrifying speed, connecting in a piercing trajectory, cutting through the sky in a horrific display. The force behind it was beyond description, leaving only one word to explain it: terrifying. Under such an assault, even experts like Tang Meyer, who had overcome the spiritual energy tribulation once, couldn't help but show expressions of shock. Xia Hou's power exceeded their expectations. Was the Saint Spiritual Academy's holy son really this strong? Could Mu Chun withstand an attack of this magnitude? All eyes gathered on the figure of the young man hovering in midair, holding their breath. Huff. Among those gazes, Mu Chun suddenly exhaled a long breath of white air. His eyes slowly closed, and at the same time, his hands came together, forming an ancient, peculiar seal. As the seal took shape, black lightning flickered at his fingertips, making a show of it. Xia Hou sneered coldly at this scene, not believing that Mu Chun had any means to resist such a terrifying attack. Boom. However, just as Xia Hou sneered, a low, rumbling thunderclap echoed through the hall. The sound seemed to carry a force of heaven and earth, as though the thunder wasn't just condensed from spiritual energy, but was a terrifying power born from the very fabric of the world. Everyone in the hall suddenly sensed it, and immediately raised their heads, their pupils shrinking. Xia Hou also looked up, his face gradually stiffening with disbelief. Above their heads, dark clouds had gathered, thick and foreboding. These weren't clouds made from spiritual energy, but rather, thunderclouds born from the natural world. Within these clouds, black lightning was wildly condensing, radiating a nearly destructive aura. Mu Chun, his eyes still closed, suddenly snapped them open. His long fingers, wrapped in lightning, gently traced a path in the air, and a soft, murmuring voice seemed to carry the weight of heaven and earth, reverberating within the grand hall and shaking the hearts of those who heard it. Thunder control art. Boom. As the deep, resonating words filled the hall, the thunder grew louder. The dark clouds above the hall gathered at an astonishing speed, the black lightning flashing inside them, resembling a massive black lightning dragon twisting its enormous body. The scene before them caused everyone to change their expression drastically. Even Zhun Qing's face was filled with shock as he gazed at the black thunderclouds. The force of heaven and earth emanating from them made their spiritual energy tremble, and they realized that the thunder within these clouds wasn't simple spiritual energy. This was true thunder born from the world itself. Such overwhelming power could never be conjured by people at their level. Mu Chen's handsome face was filled with grave concentration. His long fingers were trembling slightly, with faint flickers of lightning dancing across his fingertips. This was his first time truly performing the thunder control art after studying it for months. Generally speaking, divine arts are hard to master, and this thunder control art seemed particularly extraordinary. Though Mu Chun had only gained some understanding of it, his advantage lay in his previous training as a thunder god body. His body had been tempered by countless black divine lightning strikes, which gave him a certain familiarity with the thunder of heaven and earth. It was precisely because of this that he was able to perform the thunder control art at this moment. Boom! The black thunderclouds churned, and black lightning rapidly condensed. Below, the 9 stars transformed into a rainbow of light, which was about to violently surge forward. Boom! Mu Chen's expression grew grave. His hands quickly changed their seal, and immediately, the black thunderclouds in the sky began to shrink. In the next instant, a thunderous sound, so sharp it made people's scalp tingle, resounded throughout the entire grand hall. The hall trembled violently as if an earthquake had struck. Even the spiritual energy in the surroundings scattered as though unable to bear the pressure of such overwhelming power. Everyone looked up. The black thunderclouds above had now torn open, revealing a massive streak of black thunder, 100 feet in length. Accompanied by a deafening boom, it descended like a thunderous dragon, its lightning splitting the very space as it passed, leaving behind a long tear. The air was filled with the smell of scorched earth. The black thunder tore through the heavens and earth, as though nothing could stand in its way. It was a destructive force, overwhelming and merciless. Although this bolt of lightning was not as terrifying as the black divine thunder that 9 Nether summoned during her tribulation, The destructive fluctuation it carried was still enough to chill anyone to the bone. The black thunderbolt descended, illuminating the entire grand hall, and it also shone upon Xia Hou's face, which had twisted into a menacing, grotesque expression. Under the lightning, it appeared even more frightening. The speed of the black thunder was so fast that in the blink of an eye, it had pierced through space. Just before the 9 stars rainbow light could strike Mu Chen, it slammed into the hall with great force. Boom! At the moment of collision, a blinding light from the thunder burst forth, causing everyone to squint, their eyes stinging. Immediately after, they felt an uncontainable shockwave that swept through the hall. Boom! Boom! Cracks spread across the ground of the hall. Despite the special materials the floor was made from, it was still unable to withstand the violent impact of the thunder. Even several nearby giant columns cracked, and the vines that had spread throughout the hall were instantly turned to ashes when they made contact with the lightning. The terrifying destructive force left everyone in the hall speechless, their eyes wide in shock. Sizzle! Sizzle! In the center of the shockwave, 2 terrifying forces clashed, but the black thunder clearly had the upper hand. The dominance of the black divine thunder was not something easily resisted. After all, even Nine Nether had failed twice during her tribulation with this very lightning. While the black divine thunder that Mu Chen summoned wasn't as powerful as the one Nine Nether faced, Xia Hou was far weaker than Nine Nether at that time. Xia Hou stared at the black thunder that was gaining the upper hand. His face turned ashen, and his eyes filled with rage as he glared at Mu Chen. He quickly changed his hand seals and shouted, 9-star burst! Boom! Boom! As his voice echoed, the 9 stars exploded almost simultaneously, releasing an overwhelming wave of energy. However, just as the explosion occurred, a cold glint flashed in Mu Chen's black eyes. He extended his long fingers and lightly pointed into the air. Break! Without any further words, that single command carried an overwhelming power. Boom! At his command, the black thunderbolt instantly expanded, the lightning flashing wildly, and like an enraged dragon, it surged forward. As it passed, the terrifying force of the 9-star burst was completely annihilated in an instant. How is this possible? Xia Hou's face drained of color, and he screamed in disbelief. In this clash, it was clear that the black divine thunder had gained a crushing victory. Boom! As Xia Hou screamed, Mu Chen's expression remained indifferent as he raised his hand. The people in the hall saw a black lightning bolt engulf the 9 stars, transforming into a thunderous rainbow that tore through space, descending upon Xia Hou with an unavoidable force. Terror finally appeared in Xia Hou's eyes. From the black thunder, he sensed the approach of death. I admit defeat. However, facing his voice, Mu Chen's eyes remained indifferent. His temperament clearly did not allow for such mercy at this moment. He had exhausted all his energy to perform the thunder control art, a technique that consumed vast amounts of power. If he returned empty-handed, it would be difficult to get such a good opportunity again. After all, Xia Hou was no useless cat. The strength of the spiritual energy tribulation was enough to cause Mu Chen trouble at any time. Boom! Thus, he showed no mercy. With a thought, the black lightning struck Xia Hou's body without hesitation. Bang! When the black divine thunder struck Mu Chen's body, everyone heard a low, spine-chilling sound. Then, Xia Hou's spiritual defense shattered completely, and his body was sent flying like a kite with its string cut, blood spraying wildly. His body left a trail over 1,000 feet long, eventually crashing into a massive pillar. Boom! The pillar cracked, trembling as if on the verge of collapsing. Xia Hou's bloodied body collapsed under the pillar, his bones seemingly shattered. Stone debris buried him, and his breath became weaker and weaker, clearly near death from severe injuries. The thunderous sounds slowly subsided in the grand hall. The hall remained dead silent. Eyes filled with shock stared at the bloodied figure that looked like a corpse. Who could have expected that just moments ago, Xia Hou, who had held the upper hand, had now turned into such a pitiful sight? Tang Meyer, Zhou Yuan, and the others stared wide-eyed, transfixed by the scene. Slowly, their gazes shifted to the young man, who was also panting and slightly pale. He had defeated Xia Hou. That was a master who had passed the spiritual energy tribulation, and Mu Chen was only at the late heaven-reaching stage. This freak? Tang Meyer and the others could only sigh inwardly. They finally understood why Mu Chen could be the leader of the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy's team. Even someone as strong as Luoli had no objections. It turned out that this seemingly unremarkable young man possessed a terrifying combat power that left them in shock. There were many who could fight beyond their level, but they were all geniuses, and looking at this scene, Mu Chen likely belonged to that category as well. In contrast to Tang Meyer and the others' amazement, the Sacred Spirit Academy's team stood frozen, their faces pale, unable to believe what had just happened. They stared at the heavily injured Xia Hou, still struggling to accept this cruel reality. Xun'er gazed at the defeated Xia Hou, his face flickering between uncertainty and calculation. When he looked at Mu Chen again, his eyes were filled with wariness and apprehension. At this moment, he had finally recognized Mu Chen as a true threat. As for the many gazes directed at him, Mu Chen didn't seem to care. He coughed into his hand, his handsome face pale from exertion. The thunder control art, after all, was a divine technique, powerful but incredibly draining. Based on his own estimation, it would be hard for him to use it again anytime soon. Such a technique could only be used by a supreme expert, and the power it unleashed had certainly lived up to expectations. Mu Chen looked indifferently at the unconscious Xia Hou. With a wave of his hand, a force surged and debris flew through the air. A glowing object shot from Xia Hou's chest and landed in Mu Chen's hand. It was the Sacred Spirit Academy team's Academy token. Mu Chen glanced at the token, and his brows furrowed slightly. The token had 4,200 points, and their ranking was a solid 7th. That was almost 2 or 3 times more than Mu Chen's team. Mu Chen held the token, thought for a moment, then took out his own. With a decisive move, he forcefully seized half of the points from the Sacred Spirit Academy's token. In a flash of light, the points on his token surged to 3,700. As the points soared, Mu Chen's token emitted a brilliant glow. Within the top 16 rankings, the Sacred Spirit Academy's team vanished from view, while Mu Chen's team surged ahead with incredible speed, finally settling in the 9th position. Mu Chen gazed at the Academy token in his hand, which was glowing brightly, and smiled faintly. Their team had made it into the top 16. This meant that his information would be discovered by many other teams, and clearly, Jixin's team would be among them. Mu Chen's hand slowly clenched around the token, his black eyes narrowing with a cold, piercing gaze.